Hey, what's up guys? Chris Jr. here for Kriscoart Productions. Last week, we took a look at how to light a subject with a basic 3-point light setup. Today, I want to go a little bit beyond the basics and build upon the lighting knowledge we explored. In some of the examples we'll see today, we'll learn that doesn't necessarily mean adding lights and complex rigs, but oftentimes simplifying the shot and taking away lights. So this video will be less about setup and more about execution with story in mind. So let's briefly talk about lighting different subjects. Now usually you can get away with some pretty harsh lights on a guy, but you want to diffuse your lights on a female subject. And this is just a guide to start, but as mentioned before, the story really will be the deciding factor in that. Personally, I use this suggestion as a starting point and design my lights to the character while keeping that tip in mind. In this example, I moved the fill light more to the side of our character, creating much more detail in her face and giving it a slightly more dramatic look. I also colored the fill light with a gel, but that will be covered in the next video where we're going to be talking about separation with color. For now, we're just focusing on positioning our lights. So a few moments ago, I said that you can add a lot to the scene by taking away. So if I turn my key light off and have my fill light become my key, we see that we get a very interesting look that could possibly work for a night scene. So everything is just a matter of personal taste and seeing what works best for your environment, character in that environment, and the story that is taking place in your scene. Now there's no better way of understanding this type of stuff than by looking at some of the greatest and personal favorite cinematographers. So for now we'll say bye to our model and we'll take a look at some beautifully shot films. So here we're taking a look at a scene from the opening sequence from Sicario. The director of photography for this is one of the more famous DPs, Roger Deakins, and I wanted to use this scene as one of the better examples of how environment and story can directly affect lighting. So the armored vehicle of the SWAT team bursting through the wall caused a bunch of dust to spread and scatter throughout the house, giving this scene a nice cinematic atmosphere and giving the direct light coming through the windows a nice diffuse quality. Now instead of just letting light get carried by the dust and spreading everywhere on our characters, he faces the camera on the opposite side of the lighting source, letting the shadows fall towards the camera. This is called Upstage Lighting. So you see that just by using a strong key and probably bouncing a little bit of that light back onto the subject, you can create some pretty dramatic, high contrast lighting without using a ton of lights. Now they probably had some pretty expensive HMIs blasting light through the windows from the outside, but on a low budget shoot, you can just as effectively take advantage of sunlight coming into your scene. So this brings me to practical lights and using them to motivate your lighting. A good example of this is this scene from the movie Seven, directed by David Fincher and DP'd by Darius Khondji. The lighting style is clearly reminiscent of film noir, which used very harsh and dramatic lighting. And most of this film, but particularly in this scene, we can see that the lights hit our subjects from a side angle. Now, beauty lighting, similar to what we did last week with our subject, typically has two lights at a 45-degree angle in order to create a pleasing image. Here, however, we're not only seeing a strong key and very low amount of fill, but we're also seeing that they are placed in a way that creates shadows on the majority of our subjects' faces. Another thing that I find worth mentioning in this scene is the use of a kicker, which is sort of a backlight but used to accent the edges of our subject. Here we see how even a slight kicker gives more definition and detail to the side of Morgan Freeman's head, and without it he would start to blend into the background a little bit too much. So same thing can be noticed here with Brad Pitt's character. So finally, I wanted to talk about motivating your lights with practical lights, which are just lights that you can actually see on camera, such as these different lamps. Now this scene does this masterfully because we begin with a wide shot which not only gives the audience an understanding of where the characters are in relation to each other, it also shows where the light is coming from. So this lamp is understood to be the key hitting Brad Pitt, and this other lamp reads as the logical source for Morgan Freeman's key. Very cool stuff. Now let's move on to another David Fincher film which adopts lighting that evokes a similar feel. So we're taking a look at Fight Club, and this is lit in a very similar way since we're still dealing with some dark tones. Different DP, however, Jeff Cronenweth, and this DP has made some very interesting choices as far as hard light versus using diffuse light. So the lighting always remains pretty much high contrast throughout the film, but one thing noticeably changes from the beginning when the main character is living undisturbed in his ordinary world to when his life catapults itself into a much more violent and gritty world. So that's as much as I'm going to say about the movie because I don't want to spoil anything for you in case you haven't seen it, which if you haven't, go watch it.
Oh. What the hell are you doing?
Anyway, so we go from an ordinary life and we can see that he's using some very soft lights. But then as the story progresses and we move to gritty basement fights, we can see that there is very direct pools of light that create some very sharp and dark shadows. Now, this is a great way to maintain the very high contrast lighting style that the film has while differentiating scenes with the quality of light. Now, there are so many other DPs and so many other examples that I could ramble on about for hours, but for the sake of time, I'll just mention one last DP that has demonstrated one of the best uses of lighting to not only portray a character's emotion, but the audience's emotion towards that character.
You can act like a man! What's the matter with you? Is this how you turned out a Hollywood Pinocchio that cries like a woman? What can I do? What can I do?
I'm talking about Gordon Willis's lighting choices in The Godfather. His lighting was simple, to the point, but extremely accurate in carrying over the connection the audience felt with each character, or lack thereof. We aren't seeing any fancy lighting setups, kickers, backlights, and even not much fill. What we are seeing is a light placed at an extreme height, causing Marlon Brando's facial bone structure to cast some pretty harsh shadows, particularly on his eyes. And most of the times, we almost can't even see his eyes. Now, humans are drawn to eyes, and that is oftentimes how they can establish an emotional connection with someone. Here, there is nothing. No room for empathy, predictability, or almost any kind of connection. We are completely shut out. So assuming you know some basic plot points about this movie, you can start to see just how great this lighting is. It transcends the movie screen and deliberately distances this character from the audience. This is exactly why I say that lighting can only be purely cinematic if it caters to the story you're trying to tell. So finally, I'll leave you with this. Conrad Hall was once asked how he knew where to point his camera. "I point it at the story," he replied. Alright guys, that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and now you see the endless possibilities that you can have with lighting. Of course, we just sort of skimmed over some very basic setups, but hopefully it gives you an idea of just how much you can change the mood and tone of a scene. And definitely let me know what you think of these new videos, whether you like them or not. Let me know in the comment section below. Any feedback is super helpful. And what's also helpful is giving this video a thumbs up and sharing with your friends. That all supports this channel, and it helps me help you with more videos like this and just keeping the content coming. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. My name is Kriscoart for Kriscoart Productions, and I'll see you next time. I hate when your mind blanks like that. Okay. Okay. I think I got it. Oh yeah.